Well, I'm not going to lie. I thought I was going to go my whole day without hearing the word dad bods. But that was brought up in my group a little bit earlier, so thank you for that. I'm real happy to be with you guys here tonight. And John gave me this gift of being able to talk about, I guess it's a gift, I don't know. He was like, why don't you talk about lust and sex and all that? I was like, great, let's do it. So here we are, and you're here too. And we'll just get all the awkwardness out of the way. Kind of up front. We're in the middle of this, this summer we've been talking through this series called Use Your Influence. The whole idea behind this series is that you have been given influence, every single one of you. You've been given influence in some realm, in some capacity, because if you know another human being, you have influence. You have the ability to influence another person, which is every single one of you. The question isn't whether or not you have influence. The question is simply how we use that influence, right? It's how we leverage that influence. And so we've been talking about, and particularly looking through this, what's really the longest sermon that Jesus ever gave. It's the longest sermon that we have recorded for us. It's in the book of Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, and pulling out these principles that Jesus lays out, these teachings that Jesus lays out to teach us what it looked like to be a young adult who uses our influence in a way that actually brings others to life and brings us to life. And so that's where we're going to continue on that conversation. I already told you that we're going to talk about sex and lust tonight because Jesus talked about it. And if Jesus talked about it, we need to talk about it. And I want to start by just kind of telling you about this commercial I saw a few years ago. It was during the Super Bowl. Don't Google it. You will find it. I guess if you want to Google it, you can Google it, whatever. It wasn't any worse than that missionary, whatever, biking earlier, and all the women staring at him. Anyways, there's this woman in this commercial. It starts with this woman in a bedroom. I feel so awkward right now. But anyways, if I had blushed this today, just whatever. There's this woman in a bedroom, and she is very scantily dressed. Now, this is during the Super Bowl, right? So 1 billion people are watching this thing. And she is putting on very slowly hose, like pantyhose, what do they call them now? Pantyhose or whatever they call them. And she's putting on, I can't believe I just said that word. And they're putting on, and she's putting on, getting ready like this dress and all this kind of stuff. And she hardly has anything on the beginning of the commercial. By the end of the commercial, like 30 seconds have gone by, she has this little black dress on. And it's obvious she's getting ready for a date. And then she looks over and you see this big bouquet of flowers. And she looks at the flowers, and then she looks at the camera, and she says, it's really simple, guys. Give, and you shall receive. Now, some of the guys here are nodding their head. That's awesome. So here's the thing. That's not a commercial about flowers, is it? Because we all know what she's saying. Give and you shall receive. And here's what's fascinating. I don't even need to explain why that commercial, like what that commercial is about to any of you. Because you know exactly what she's talking about. What's crazy is that this flower company, Banks, remember this is going out to 1 billion people, right? 1 billion people are going to see this commercial. And the only way that commercial works is if that flower company can safely assume that there are sexual norms that 1 billion people have bought into, that you don't need to explain, that will be obvious in 30 seconds to watch a commercial, right? To the point of being, and really the sexual norms are this, that the majority of guys out there are willing to pay small prices, like buying a bouquet of flowers, in order to get something in return sexually. And that the majority of women out there, the majority of young women out there, understand that your sexuality might be your greatest asset in helping you get what you want. So the whole commercial only works if we bought into that somehow, in some way, shape, or form. But here's what's interesting to me. We don't even realize the water we swim in, do we? You know how you put a fish in water and you just are used to the water, right? It's kind of like we are. My guess is that we see a commercial like that, or we experience something like that, and we don't even question it in our minds. It almost happens so subconsciously, so instantaneously. It's not like none of us are nerds and geeks and kind of like analyzing commercials, like what are they trying to say about sexual norms? I mean, like we're not doing that. We just buy it. We just embrace it. And it teaches us something, and we begin to learn something about what it means to be a sexual being. And we're sent a million of these messages all the time without even realizing it. And so what I want to challenge tonight, just for a few minutes, I just want to spend a couple minutes talking to you about, I want to challenge some of those sexual norms that you have probably bought into, that I have bought into. And I want to challenge some of the sexual norms that we've bought into. And the reason I want to challenge them is because I think for some of us, it's actually led us to making some really destructive choices. And you don't have to. In fact, if we were going to be really, really honest, and I'm not going to ask you to be, but you know this, for some of us, the biggest regrets that we have in our life, even now, as a 21-year-old, 19-year-old, 24-year-old, we haven't lived a ton of life, but for some of us, the greatest regrets that we have right now, if you were to go around and to share with your table or to share in your group later what the greatest regret in your life is, you wouldn't talk about that you chose that school over that school. That was not the greatest regret. You wouldn't share a story about how you took that job and you wish you would have taken that job. That was a regret. That's not the greatest regret. You wouldn't talk about the thing that you said to that person that you wish you could take back. That's a regret, but that's not the greatest regret. If we were being honest, for some of us, the greatest regrets that we have experienced in our life have to do in the area of sexuality. And we sat there and we did something that we thought we wouldn't do, or we gave our heart and our body away to someone that we thought we wouldn't give our heart and our body away to, and we regret that. And we find ourselves saying like, oh man, if I just wouldn't have done that then, if I just would have chosen this. I thought it was just a spring break thing. I thought it was just a one-night thing. I thought he would never leave me. I thought she would never leave me. And they did. And you experienced it. And some of us are living with deep regret over that. There was a huge study done a couple of years ago by some researchers at the University of Texas. So these guys are not Christians. This is not even a religious thing. They're just wanting to go around and they're talking to 20-somethings, to young adults, trying to figure out how young adults view sexuality. It's this great study that was done. And there's this one quote that struck me that I just want to read to you real quick. It says, most emerging adults, so this is a study done by Julie Euchre and Mark Regners, and they said most emerging adults, that's you, young 20-somethings, most emerging adults will not experience an unintended pregnancy. That's not going to be most of our stories. Or an STI, sexually transmitted infection. Most young adults aren't going to experience that. But have already and will continue to experience regrettable sex. That was one of the fundamental findings of their study. Regrettable sex. I don't want you. Your leaders, your mentors, John, no one here, your friends do not want you to experience regrettable sex. It doesn't have to be that way. And you can treat, and the only way, and I can promise you, man, the quickest way to experiencing regrettable sex will be when you and I treat sex as if it's just physical. In fact, if I could do anything tonight, like if I could lay all my cards on the table, I would do anything to try to convince you of this one truth tonight. That sex is not just physical. It is more than physical. And that's one of those cultural norms that we bought into. That sex is just physical. But you know it's not just physical. In fact, how many movies have you seen where a boyfriend gets in a jealous rage over the girlfriend after their relationships turn sexual and the girlfriend leaves, whatever, and in a jealous rage does something? How many news stories have you seen or heard about where a man in a jealous rage kills someone to the point of killing people because a relationship that got sexual went south? How many girls do you know whose hearts have been broken after a relationship turned sexual and it didn't keep going? And the regret and the pain of that breakup would have been bad, but it wouldn't have been as severe if there wouldn't have been a union, a sexual union involved. Sex is so much more than physical. Let's just talk about sexual abuse for a second. That's part of my story. Some of you know that. I know for a fact that is some of your story. We're in a too big of a crowd right now for that not to be true. Sexual abuse for some of us when we were children. If sex is just physical, why does the sexual abuse that some of us experienced when we were children still haunt us? Why? If it's just physical. If sex is just physical, why is it that breakups are so much more complicated and have been difficult when sex has gotten involved? Why is that? If sex is just physical, then why do we stay longer with someone who we know is not good for us? If sex is just physical, why is it that trust issues, when a relationship went sexual and then all of a sudden something happened and trust issues haunt us through the rest of our, like a year later we still got trust issues? Why is that? Because you know and I know that sex is more than just physical. Here's the thing. I want you to get this, man. If you hear one sentence tonight, it's this one right here. If you treat sex, and if I treat sex, if we treat sex like it is just physical, it will inevitably lead to regret and hurt that could be avoided. When you and I treat sex like it is just physical, it will always and inevitably lead to hurt and regret that could have been avoided. And I can promise you, Jesus does not want you to live a life of regret. I know that. I've tasted, I've seen it. I know he doesn't. And he speaks into this. He speaks into this. Over the course of these last few weeks, as I said a moment ago, we've been looking at the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is dropping these teachings. He's dropping, it's more than teaching, he's dropping a vision. He's painting a picture of what life could look like. Surrender to him. Life could look like as God intended it to look. For you right now, not one day, not someday, not when you go to heaven one day, not even that, right now, this day. That God wants you to taste and experience the fullness of life right now as a young adult. And he paints a picture of what that could look like. And over the course of the series, you've been looking at things like how we use our words and what it looks like to take care of others around us and all that. And Jesus turns the topic in the middle of the sermon to sex. Because how can you talk about having a fulfilling life without talking about something that we all have to address? Right? So this is what it says. It was on the screen a moment ago. If you want to look at the Bibles, I think there's some at your tables. Now I'd love for you to turn to Matthew chapter 5. Because I just want you to see these words. These words, they're very few words, not a lot. It's not a huge passage, but man, they are packed with some power. Matthew chapter 5. Is anybody there has a page number?
736.
736. 736, if you're using one of the Bibles at your table. Look at verse 27. Jesus said, "You have heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery." Now stop there for a second. Jesus is referring to the Ten Commandments at this point, found in Exodus 20. So everyone knew the Ten Commandments. And Jesus knows that they know the Ten Commandments. He says, you've heard this said, and you grew up hearing this. You learned this in Sunday school, and you know one of the Ten Commandments is do not commit adultery. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. And everybody hears Jesus say, yeah, we know that one, Jesus. Yep, got it. Do not commit adultery. Good. Never done that. Can we go eat now? Can we get on with this? Jesus says, wait, not done. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out. Throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your strong hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Now, obviously, this last part here, Jesus is talking in hyperbole, extreme exaggeration. He's not literally saying to go pluck out your eyes, because could you pluck out your eyes and never see a thing again and still lust? Absolutely. He's not saying literally go cut off your hand, because could you cut off your hand and still sin against others? Absolutely, right? He's making an extreme example here, basically trying to say, whatever you have to do to address this issue of lust, you need to do it. No matter the sacrifice, you just need to figure this one out. Because of how important this topic is, and how important this is when it comes to how we view others and how we relate to others. And I love how Jesus pushes it further, because remember he started, he says, you've heard it said don't commit adultery. And it's almost like he's saying, that's kind of permission to play. That's that's setting the bar about as low as you can possibly set it. And he built on that and says, but let me push that idea further. He says, but I say anyone who's even looked at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And there's two really, really important phrases in this statement that I just want to point out real quick. First of all, he says, I say anyone who even looks at a woman with lust. In other words, what Jesus is getting at here is the person who looks at another person with the intention of lusting after them. Does that make sense? Looks with lust. In other words, there's intention around that. You're saying, I'm going to do this to this person, use this person, I'm going looking for it right now. In other words, just seeing someone attractive is not lust. It's what you do with it after that. It's what you do intentionally after that. I was walking through New York City a couple of years ago, and my wife Jenny was right beside me, and she says, do not look up to the right. Now, what do you think? That is a trap, man. Let me just tell you right now. That is a trap. Because what do you think the very first thing I did was? Look up and where? To the right. All right, you guys are smart. All right, good. I look up to the right, and it is like a 90-story Victoria's Secret model, right, on this building. It is massive. And she like slaps me. And she's like, I told you not to look. Like, I can't help it. What are you doing? That's not lust. Seeing the 90-foot story. So, guys, let me just free you for a second, okay? That's not lust. It's what I do after that. It's will I look again. It's will I look with the intention of lusting. That's what Jesus is getting at here. He says, anyone who looks with lust. So it's not being tempted. It's not just seeing people who are attractive. That's not what Jesus is getting at. It's not being tempted to carry out your thoughts sexually about another person. That's not lust, that's temptation. The emphasis is on the idea of looking with lust, looking with the intent to lust, looking again, and then looking a second time, and then a third time, and swiping again, and clicking again, and scrolling down again. That's what Jesus is talking about. Are we tracking? Lust is when our desire has turned into a demand. Where we take someone out without them even knowing and use them for our own gratification. It's grasping and taking what isn't yours. And lust ultimately is this craving to possess someone else. The second phrase I just want to point out in this passage real quick is he says, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. In his heart. Obviously, Jesus says, I know you haven't committed adultery with them literally, but you have in your heart. And I love this because for Jesus and in the first century, the heart represented kind of like the mission control center of our life. You know how NASA has a mission control center and everything runs out of there, all the decisions are made and all that, right? You have a mission control center in your life. Anytime in the Bible you see that idea of the heart, that's what it's referring to. It's that place inside of you where your attitudes, your words, your thoughts, your intentions, your motivations, all of that springs from somewhere. It comes from somewhere. That's your heart. And Jesus constantly pushes us back to saying, how is your heart? I want to change that part of you. I don't want to just change the behaviors. I want to change the part of you that feeds the behaviors. Because that's what ultimately we need transformed the most. Which is, in a lot of ways, see, I think what Jesus is doing is he's reframing our understanding in a lot of ways of what it means to be right with God. Because for most people, the thought is that you need to do certain things to be right with God. And then you need to not do certain things to be right with God. And then God will be happy. Just do more good things, do less bad things, and God's going to be happy. In other words, if we take that sort of mindset, you can kind of go through life and go, well, I never murdered anyone, so I'm good. And Jesus says, actually, maybe not. Because, you're just looking at the outside. In other words, Jesus is saying it's possible to go your whole life having never murdered anyone, and yet your heart is full of hate and racism and bitterness. Would that be a life well lived? Jesus says, you can go your whole life having never stolen anything, but your heart is full of jealousy and contempt for those who have things that you don't have. And would that be a life well lived? Jesus says, you can go your whole life having never committed adultery, and yet you objectify women. And you objectify men. You use them. Would that be a life well lived? And I just want you to know, man, Jesus wants to change our hearts. And lust will warp our hearts in a significant way. Because it places that expression, it places sexual expression purely in the context of a consumer relationship. When sex was always intended to be expressed in the context of a covenant relationship. You know what a covenant is? A covenant is a binding agreement. When you make a covenant with someone, I know that's kind of archaic language, it's kind of old language, but it's really rich language. But when you make a covenant with someone, you've entered into like a solemn agreement. And think about a relational covenant through marriage. When you get married, what are you saying to the person, the spouse that you got married? You're saying, I am entering into a solemn agreement with you, a sacred agreement before God, that I will not leave you, that I am committed to you financially, emotionally, legally, sexually. I am yours, no one else's. And that is why marriage is the only relationship strong enough to hold that powder keg of sex. Because it gives us the safety we need to express sexually to another person without having the fear that we'll be left. And any time we give ourselves sexually to someone outside the confines of marriage, we have no guarantee that they'll be there for us tomorrow. We really don't. Because there's no other commitment. There's no covenant. And what you will do is you will guard yourself from being too intimate with that person. But sex is always an attempt to gain intimacy. Do you see how this will work against each other? Do you see how when a relationship gets sexual, you find yourself wanting to use words like, I'll love you forever, I'll always love you? Our hearts are drawn towards that kind of language. Our hearts are drawn towards covenant kind of language, even though there's no covenant. That's because God hardwired you for that. And this is why trust issues develop so deeply for young men and young women just like yourself. When relationships get sexual and there's no covenant to bind them together. It's where fear sets in, insecurity and anxiety. Because your deepest longing when it comes to a relationship is that you will be loved without the fear of being left. And a covenant guarantees that. So this is serious to Jesus. Because he wants you to experience life, man, in all of its fullness. How can you use, how can we use someone when it comes to lust, right? Because lust changes the relationship from covenant to consumer. I just take. I just get what I want from you. You use. And how can you use someone and love them at the same time? How can you use someone and lead them at the same time? You can't. And so I just want to challenge you give you one last challenge here. Because I want to take Jesus' words seriously. I want you to take Jesus' word seriously. Even if you're not a Christian, I don't know where you're at with the whole faith thing. But I would say try it. Just try this and see if your life isn't more fulfilling. What I would challenge you is this. When I first began following Jesus, this was a significant area of refining in my life that I needed to hand over. Pornography had a grasp on me that was suffocating. I lived, I wasn't planning on sharing this, but I want you to know what's possible. I was going to the University of Louisville in Kentucky. That was about a 25-minute drive from my home. And when I had an hour break between classes, I would drive the 25 minutes home. That was just when internet was able to really get in homes, I guess, at that point. But I would drive the 25 minutes home just to get online for 8 minutes to view things, and then drive the 25 minutes back. It just was suffocating. I guess some of you know what that feels like. And then Jesus wrecked me in the most beautiful kind of way. And I knew that it was time for me to start following Jesus. And I knew this was going to be an area that I needed to surrender. Because it wasn't life at its fullest. I knew that. And so there's this, but when you've trained your mind to use people so much, it's hard, you have to retrain it. You know what I mean? You've spent years thinking about people as objects. You've spent years thinking about sex as just physical. You've spent years, whatever, like it's hard to just change that. So you need to retrain your mind. It's like the Apostle Paul says, to renew your mind. So one of the things that I began to tell myself after reading this passage, because he's just saying, man, no one else belongs to you. You don't own them. They're not yours. Stop using them. Because it's not only wrecking them, and they don't even know it, it's wrecking you. You're losing a little bit of your dignity every time you rob someone else of theirs. So I just started saying this to myself. Every time I was tempted, every time I wanted to act on urges, I just said, they don't belong to me. And that almost seems it's almost so simple it sounds silly. But I said that 1,000,000 times. They don't belong to me. That person doesn't belong to me. They're not mine. They're not property. They're not objects. They are sacred, created in the image of God. They don't belong to me. They don't belong to me. They don't belong to me. No, I will not look at that. They don't belong to me. No, I won't go there. They don't belong to me. No, I will not think about that. They don't belong to me. And over time, it starts to break. The mindset begins to shift and change. Guys, sex is so much more than physical. It's so much more beautiful than that. It is so much more sacred and wonderful and mysterious than just being physical. It is meant to be expressed and experienced in the context of a covenant where you know you will be loved and you will not be left. Do not settle for anything less than that. That is what your Heavenly Father wants for you. He says, I got something so great for you. And it will not be easy, but it will be so good. So trust me on this. Gouge out your eye if you got to. Not literally. Cut off your hand if you got to. Whatever you do, address this. You know what? They don't belong to you. Can I pray? God, I know I just have this sense with this group here tonight. That this is a group of young men and women who live in a culture that is screaming at us and pounding us with messages that sex is just physical. And you come along, Jesus, and you give us a vision of sexuality that is so much more beautiful than that. So much more compelling. So much more interesting. I pray that you strengthen this group to not settle for those cultural norms that will leave us empty. That you give them the strength that they would bind together, that they would find a few brothers in arms, sisters in arms, that they will stand against the bombardment that we're sin that sex is just physical, and that we will choose a different path. That we will use our influence to lift up others, not use them. To honor others, not degrade them. I pray that we'll do whatever we need to do to walk away from lust. I pray that you will remind us no one belongs to us. They're not property, they're not ours, they're not objects. And I pray this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So we're going to go into our groups.